That's it's funny because when people think of creativity, I think most people default to an idea that when someone is creative or they think of somebody being creative, it's spontaneous.
Mm.
It's spur of the moment. It's I got struck with an inspiration or I got struck with an apple and now I know understand gravity.
Yeah.
It's like there's so much that I think plays into the story behind what creativity is that I want to spend a couple minutes here just kind of unraveling that onion.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I personally don't think it's actually as spontaneous as people believe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
All right. Let's go do that. Let's do this. Shoots. All right. If you'd see down here. Turn that down.
Oof.
What's that?
All right. Cool. Cool.
We are back
We
in the
are
car.
big connection. Look at those squirrels running across the ground. Little spastic creatures.
Yeah.
All right, man. So let's jump right into things.
We should. We absolutely should. Week 10. Wow.
Yes. I was just, going over some of the latest in the AI hype cycle,
Okay.
and I am becoming increasingly more disillusioned by our sector
Disillusioned?
and our industry, Jake. I'll tell you that much.
Okay. Well, I guess dive into that. What do you mean?
I think, for lack of a better word, a lot of the technology that we're seeing out there right now, or a lot of the claims about artificial intelligence right now, are coated with bullshit.
Overhyped,
Yes, to say
Okay.
the least.
to say the least.
I think a lot of this stuff is great, and again, I'm a huge proponent of a lot of artificial intelligence in the tech. But when I'm looking at when I use it, and I use it with the hope that it delivers on what's promised,
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it.
No, I guess dive into like what kind of things are you trying to use it for, and what's failed or what worked. Anything particular that you were like, I tried to use it for this and it was just
Well,
not
it's more
up to
about
your
the
standards.
it's more about the claim of
Okay.
artificial general intelligence.
AGI.
AGI.
Okay.
Or when I go on, again, I don't say these things to shit on the technology. I say these things to speak on the claims that they're making about the technology that's out there. If I have a car, if we're riding in a car, and I say that it's a car and it can drive, and you can use it to drive places, that's an accurate claim.
Yeah.
If I say that the car can take you to the moon and back, that's a bullshit claim. It doesn't take away from the value of the car, but the talk around it is bullshit.
Okay. That's very
And it's
interesting.
not even a slight reframe where you can say, well, we're just talking about it this way so you can see the benefits about this revolutionary technology. To me, it's getting way ahead of itself. So with all that said, I was talking with a friend, and we were talking about the power of technology. He was talking about how transformative it is, how amazing it is,
Yeah.
how it's going to replace all coders. He was speaking to Anthropic's CEO,
Oh.
saying that 90% of the code that we have right now will be written by AI in less than 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think is not again. I think this is a nonsensical claim. I think it's not really rooted or grounded in anything. But it's a vanity metric to me.
It's a
Saying
moonshot.
Yeah. Well, no, not a moonshot. I think it's a vanity metric.
Oh, a vanity metric?
I don't think that necessarily speaks, because I've never thought that coding was the value that a programmer brought to a team or an organization. I've always thought that coding was a step towards learning how to program a machine. And even with natural language, you still have to program a machine.
That's true.
And like I would, when we were both working at Rocket, I'm sure that the business people just thought of us as coders, but the real value that we brought was understanding how to translate what they want into how a machine can interpret that.
Right.
And sure, there was some value in us being able to actually understand the syntax and understand the logic there, but just because we remove the action of pressing on the keys doesn't mean that you still like have logic. It doesn't mean that you can understand the larger program of things. And so so I have a lot of thoughts on there, but just to kind of bring it back into the whole instance where I was seeing this, is I was talking to this friend, and he said he was talking about how everything was, we should just set the world on fire because everything is about to blow up, and AI is gonna just replace everything and nobody's gonna know what to do. And so I was like, let me go on Lovable and ask it something super simple. So I asked it to create an app, and
Okay.
I tried to be vague. I tried to not be specific.
Okay.
As specific as I would be about something.
Okay.
And it didn't, I was just like, hey, help me create a social media app. And it generated code. It generated some boilerplate, some stuff that I could find on like github.com and press 3 buttons and go and get the same version of that. But it didn't, the first time it generated it, it had an error. Then I had to go and say, fix the error. And then it fixed it. And then I said, okay, what else do I need to do to make this actually something I can use? And then it broke the code. And then I was like, okay, well, let's fix this one thing. And then it crashed out and broke the whole other thing. And so I'm like, I'm fidgeting with this. I'm like, it doesn't remove knowing what you want and knowing how to ask for what you want is essentially what I'm getting at. And so I'm starting to become disillusioned with the fact that it's just gonna be able to do everything for me or do everything for us, and sitting more in the space where it's something that it's a really, really good universal tool, but that's where it is right now, and it's not going beyond that. So anyways, I'll pause right there because
I think there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, starting out the first thing with the whole Anthropic news that came out late last week around the claim that we're 3 to 6 months away from replacing 90% of all the code that's being written. You're absolutely right. I agree with you, the fact that it's a vanity metric, or it's something that they're going to say to kind of pull in the headlines. And one really easy way to check this is if you hear a headline like that, go straight to their careers page, and you'll see probably 5 or 6 postings for software engineers. And so it's all right, they're not even drinking their own Kool-Aid.
Right.
So there's something to be said there, just do your own research, and they're still hiring a bunch of software devs. So that's not going away. If it was really going away, they would stop hiring and they would just do it themselves. But they can't, because it's not good enough yet. I'm not saying it won't ever get there, because I think it will get there. It's just not there right now as we're speaking in early 2025. And so it is kind of a weird spot to be in a place where it can't do everything, but we know it can get there. And so if you decide to learn the tools of, let's say, Lovable.dev 1.0, they'll probably become obsolete by Lovable.dev 2.0, because all the tricks and tips you learn to try and glue this thing together, hopefully when they improve the software, it'll be either completely redundant or obsolete. Facts. Right? And so you're going to start learning these techniques on how to build software that are completely reliant on the tools you're building, which is a lot. I guess a lot of people in the software community do that already, right? You have React, you've got Next, you've got frameworks like Vercel, platforms like Vercel that you kind of put everything you have into one box and kind of say, hey, just ship this. So that's a symptom of the entire software engineering practice. But specifically with LLMs, you don't actually get the actual problem you're trying to solve. It's just fix the bug that you created. Fix the thing that you did.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I go back and forth because I've also tried Cursor. I've tried some of these other Windsurf and a Copilot.
How are windsurfing?
They're getting better. I think if you are specific, kind of going back to what you were talking about, once you are specific about what you're talking about, it can be very useful in a microcosm.
Okay.
I'm in a function. I know what the inputs are. I know what my expected outputs are. Fix the function and generate me a unit test. I've had a lot of success with that, but I've not had a lot of success with like build me the app from end to end. Like the best thing I've had to do is maybe build like the most basic Google Authenticator ever, and it's like, yeah, we could just click to GitHub and probably copy paste that from another project, or I've done it 10 times, so I can just copy paste that code. I think there's something to be said about how quickly you can get that done. If I've done it 10 times and I know what to do, there is a certain amount of efficiency gained if I can just say like, hey assistant, copy and paste it from this working code that I have and just add it to my new project. You know, there is some type of hybrid there. I think that you get to be more efficient because you can just output more lines of code.
It's like dynamic boilerplate.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Dynamic boilerplate, that's interesting.
But I think I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. I find that it's like gasoline on fire, but you still have
It's
to.
a tool. It's
you have
it's
to
an
get that
ultimate
spark
tool.
going.
Yeah,
You can't just throw gas on the ground and expect the fire to happen.
that's true.
And I think that that's what people are communicating. In a sense, it's software marketing. This is the newest and greatest thing, and it's going to revolutionize and change everything.
Yep.
But there is a moment, and there are times where that just becomes stale and that becomes dry, and then I think things taper down for a little bit, and then we move into that space where the real development happens, and then after everybody's bored of it, then we really start to see the technology permeate through everything.
Yeah, there's also the whole thing that the treadmill's still going.
Yeah.
People are still trying to make these things better. So, you know, it's going to be very interesting to see the kind of iterations they're able to do. But there's also going to be companies that spin up that are just like, hey, we're going to fix all your AI generated code. Like, that's all we're going to do is like, we're going to help you fix the thing you just tried to build.
You know, I was
like boot camps and stuff, you know?
Yeah, of course. Or let me teach, and we already see this right now. I'll teach you how to prompt engineer.
Yeah.
That's becoming a whole sector because, you know, some people are better at prompt engineering than others, and you get different platforms have their nuances, and so you have to get used to that. It's almost like different programming languages have their
different
frameworks.
Yeah.
Different frameworks, and even within a programming language, you could have different frameworks.
True.
And so that's, to me, is just the nature of how things work, and I think that that's something that we're going to be seeing more and more of. To your point, as the industry and the space starts to develop and starts to grow.
Yeah.
Going back to what we were talking about with the 90% of code thing.
Sure.
And why I think it's a vanity metric.
Sure.
Even Sundar Pichai was saying that Google engineers write 25% of their code with AI, or 25% of their code is generated by AI.
Oh, wow.
Which is slightly, actually he didn't say that, or the quote that I was reading didn't say that. It said AI writes 25% of their code, which is not the same as engineers use AI to write 25% of their code.
That's true.
Mark Zuckerberg was saying that by mid-2025, they'll have agents, they will have agents that, what was it saying? He said they'll have agents that act as mid-level engineers throughout Meta. So I don't know maybe what they have behind closed doors, because there's a huge chance that they're just way ahead. But I would be shocked if there wasn't some person acting as the first domino that puts the AI in motion.
Yeah.
And has it go and actually write and do all this development.
It's going to be very interesting. I think this is a tool, and so we're seeing the bar kind of raise, right? So anyone that was a beginner before, now automatically kind of everyone gets to that medium level, right? Because you have these great tools. And then it's like, okay, now the differentiator becomes like, how senior are you? How much of an expert are you?
Yeah.
So many people that are experts at prompt engineering, but you know, what does that actual top 10% or top 1% even look like?
Yeah.
when everyone's now baseline is up to this medium level. And that's what Zuckerberg, I think, was talking about, is that like the agents are just so good where it's like it's just going to be the new baseline for how we determine like your efficiency. Like if you can't beat the agent and you're working with an agent, then like we don't need to hire you.
But all right, let's take this word agent and move it in a different space.
Okay.
If you take the word agent and you put it in, say, an entertainment space.
In an entertainment space,
Yeah.
okay.
Agents can be very good and they can get the most out of talent. Let's say a performer or
like a talent agent.
Yeah.
Okay.
They represent the person the talent, the performer, the
That's
entertainer.
interesting. Yeah.
They can almost get more for the person. Even in sports, for instance, Rich Paul, LeBron's agent, he's renowned for being able to get great deals for the talent, but you have to have an element of talent there, or an element of something to sell there.
Yeah.
Like he can't just go and take.
He's a force multiplier.
Right.
Not a king.
Force multiplier.
I mean, some people say kingmaker, but
Right.
he's a force multiplier at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It has to be a force there to be reckoned with.
Exactly. Where
Yeah.
you can go and, do something with that. And that's like when I think of an AI agent, it's not just going to go and do it. It's something that will, multiply the force. And then you could even take it in a different space where even just an agent, like a real estate agent, it can get you a great deal, but if you don't have money to buy a house, then,
That's true. That's true.
or if you don't have a great house to sell, then
Yeah, and also, I think eventually, maybe not this year, but very soon, it'll just become the de facto tool that, like, how people launch VS Code. It's just the de facto tool, or, NeoVim or whatever you have.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just going to be, hey, this thing comes pre-built with an agent in it, and you should know how to leverage it to the best of your ability to get the most out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because somebody who is doing that is going to be obviously more efficient than someone who's not.
yeah, it's auto
In
complete
anywhere.
on crack.
Yeah, so exactly. It's like, why wouldn't you use that? Why wouldn't you use spell check?
Yeah.
Grammar check. It's like, that's going to make you faster. It's going to make
Yeah.
you better. So eventually we're going to get there. And so being in a time now where it's kind of ramping up, it's important to look at all the spots where we think it's actually going to like make a big difference in the tech world, like the companies that are going to make the biggest dents, and then the products that they come up with. That's actually going to change it. Like we talked a little bit about how I think chatbots probably won't be the same form factor in 3 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be-
You've been mentioning that on multiple occasions.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a totally different form factor where you can actually change the way that you experience the interaction between you and the actual like system.
Do you have any ideas about that?
I don't yet, because all the ideas that I have come out with like stuff we've already done, and I'm almost like it needs to be more progressive than that. It needs to be almost like
Like a chip in your brain?
I'm almost there. Like I think the intermediary step is the way that we can actually put bracelets on like a human's wrist and then read their muscle movements and then map that to, so like the Apple Vision Pro can do this with your eyes, but the same exact thing can be done with a bracelet on your wrist to map your hand movements, and you don't have to move your wrist, but it can detect the muscle movements. I think there's going to be something like that for either agents or replacing that whole like chatbot paradigm. I'm very excited to see like what those kind of innovations are going to be, but that might also be another talk for one of our behind the scenes episodes.
Yeah, where we go into more of the actual how you can get there and like what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
I know that Zuckerberg, Meta, had a version of that where they had their a bracelet tied that would interpret muscle movements.
Same. It's that technology where I think you can do it with muscle, and then maybe even getting it more into like the brain waves or stuff like that, where we start becoming. I think it was the movie WALL-E, where all the people are just in chairs and they can just think about what they want. They just see it in front of them.
I've heard so many references to WALL-E, but I've
Really?
never actually seen WALL-E.
Really?
Yeah.
It's cool, but it's also kind of sad because it's a Disney movie. So it's got like that element. Yeah, a little bit of like the childhood movie of like, this is not going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a happy ending and everything, but it's also like there's a plot and everything. So just like any Disney movie,
Yeah.
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 It's good though in terms of a reference point to where the future might be.
Mm.
But
That's
I mean, I also just heard the fact that Elon Musk was like, we tried to design a car for Blade Runner, and that's how we got the Cybertruck. So it's like, people are looking at movies and entertainment as the way of the future. I mean, they have for a long time.
I'm sure there's a saying around that where it was real life imitates fiction or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Fiction imitates real life and vice versa. They're kind of mutually feed into each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that goes to exactly what we see when even when we talk about how technology develops, is a lot of it starts in the brain of somebody, and that ends up becoming what people say, hey, I want to go and create in the real world.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good segue into what the next topic, this whole creativity and spontaneity. Let's talk about creativity and spontaneity.
That's it's funny because when people think of creativity, I think most people default to an idea that when someone is creative or they think of somebody being creative, it's spontaneous. It's spur of the moment. It's I got struck with an inspiration, or I got struck with an apple and now I know I understand gravity.
Yeah.
It's like there's so much that I think plays into the story behind what creativity is, that I want to spend a couple minutes here just kind of unraveling that onion.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I personally don't think it's actually as spontaneous as people believe. I think there are moments of spontaneous creativity, sure, but the people who are the best creatives, I'm thinking George Carlin, some of the best creatives like in the entertainment industry, they have a framework, they have a plan for their creativity. It's not spontaneous. And the plan that they have allows them, right, after years and years and years of mastery, to be incredibly spontaneous with their creativity, but behind that's an entire structure.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what my thought was in terms of unraveling the story of, is creativity actually spontaneous?
I love that topic, and one of my creative heroes is Leonardo da Vinci.
Great one. Absolutely
And
fantastic.
he was also a scientist. And
a little bit of everything, actually.
Right? And I think that at a high level too, a little creepy too. He was like stealing bodies and
had to learn
them apart. He was like, I need to know how this works so I can make my art better.
Yeah.
But this concept of scientific art has been floating around in my head over the last couple of days.
Scientific art.
Because I think a lot of people look at them as different. I know this one guy, he openly classifies everybody as either engineers or artists.
Okay.
And I'm like, to me, I get what he's saying. There's like a type that typically gravitates to engineering.
Towards those archetypes.
Yeah, and there's a type that gravitates towards art. But I think if you go into an engineering field and you hang around long enough, you start realizing, no, there's artists here. There's people that when they write their code, it's poetic.
Yeah.
You can, even if it's not just, there's people have styles. There's people that are very textbook. There's people that are very throw everything at the wall. There's people in like let it develop, and there's people where it might not be the cleanest, but you're like, oh, the idea you're trying to communicate is astounding.
Yeah.
And that's on the engineering space. On the art space, you see a lot of people that are very methodical in the way that they express themselves. There's people, George Carlin was a very technical writer. He had great ideas and he was very much about expressing his ideas, but he was also very structured in the way that he presented an idea. There was a rhythm, there was a cadence, he was very, very rehearsed. They talk about how he used to rehearse endlessly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just come from shooting from your hip, that comes from
Structure.
That comes from practicing shooting from your hip.
Exactly.
So that way when you actually get to the duel or the performance, you have a quick trigger, you have a quick draw.
Yeah, same thing. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's Picasso.
Yeah.
With the abstract paintings, There's a very specific method that he used to get to that abstraction. It was like, let me paint the real life version of this to the most amount of detail that I can, and then let me get to the essence of what I'm trying to draw.
Yeah.
And then that gets translated into his final works, which is like a bunch of abstract kind of lines and shapes and weird
Yeah.
stuff. But it all comes from the essence of what he's doing in super finite detail.
Yeah. If you look at his earlier work,
Yeah.
he would draw full portraits, like portraits that the average
He
person
had that
can't
range,
do. Yeah.
but he was famous for
The
you
abstract.
know, and that's what's so crazy is that people like some people look at that and they go, oh yeah, like I can draw a bunch of lines on a screen.
Yeah.
It's like sure, but you don't have that same context of like
You don't have
doing
the range.
magnificent
Yeah.
ranges of work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect example.
yeah,
Is that what he was the idea that he was expressing by removing the shading and
The details.
the detail was that was the art, that was the ideal the idea. And ironically enough, by him doing that, it showed the value in the other art that he did earlier in his career.
yeah,
It's like his whole body of work you have to be able to see to understand the value of that last part. But going back to that whole
which is structure. All of that is
yeah,
structure. He didn't
structure.
just come up and say I'm going to draw some lines on the board.
Yeah.
There was a very clear way that he learned how to do his craft, or he mastered it to the spot where then he could draw on a napkin and everyone's like, oh my gosh, this sells for millions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. That saying where it's like, well, I spent a whole lifetime.
Yeah,
Figuring out
creativity is not spontaneous, to
Yeah.
me at least.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And
Yeah.
to that part of art, I think something that gets lost a lot is art is skillful expression. Art actually shares the same root as technology.
What's that root? Do you know?
So it's like techne or technique.
Okay.
And
technique.
That's technique. So like technique is the end of the word, it's a suffix. But like the technique root is art. Like
Okay.
that's when you trace it back, it means art. And
Okay.
so when technology is the study of art and the study of skill and how you're doing things. And when you get better at skillfully doing things, that's when you develop techniques. But the art is when you can express yourself through the techniques that you have. And so you become a better artist, not only when you learn like a multitude of techniques, but when you know how to apply those techniques where it's uniquely you, or it's uniquely an idea that you're trying to point to or show or bring
Yeah.
to life. And so I think like what you're saying about it's when we look at creativity being more of a structured thing, it's like that creativity creates the grounds for spontaneity and for being like improvising.
Yeah.
And I'm like, again, I'm somebody that I like to draw in multiple areas of my life and different experiences. And I think a lot about, as we're talking right now, I think a lot about in sports and in athletics, you spend all of this time practicing to get to a game. And in the game, you shouldn't be thinking, you should be just doing.
Reacting.
And
yeah.
trusting that all of the work will have shaped your instinct so that way in the moment you can just react.
Yeah.
And a lot of the that's why practice should be harder, because if you do something that's harder and then you go to the easier thing, then the easier thing should feel like
Yeah. That makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's this I agree with the premise of creative structure yields spontaneity, or yields creative spontaneity in the moment.
Yeah, I think there's obviously like outliers here, and there's obviously like exceptions to the rule. There are definitely moments where people can feel spontaneous and be creative, but I think the people who are like their life's work is being creative
Yeah.
is where I'm kind of focusing on. The really people who need to be able to do it consistently over long periods of time
Yeah.
is where you need to have a certain structure for that. And being explicit about that structure, I think is super important.
Yeah. Well, I think as somebody who I love music, I love instruments, I love a lot of different forms of art. I'm not the best at the things, but definitely like doing it as a hobby.
For sure.
I think that software engineering is one of the most creative fields and industries in the world.
Most people wouldn't say that.
Most people wouldn't say
Most
that.
people don't have the context you have, but yeah.
But I don't think. I mean, yeah. But the way that I look at it is, you. I have no idea where we are. Oh, okay, we're putting first. Is the reason why I say that is because I look at it as as software engineers, we're creative with our logic.
Okay.
And I think that's what I was talking about this on.
So is my wife.
I was looking at the I was talking about this somewhere else. I think it might have been on my other channel, but the wow, that I lost my train of thought for a second. The creative with our logic. Where was I gonna go with that? If it comes back to me, it comes back to me.
Creative. She's very creative with her logic.
But I mean, like that's the she's very expressive with her logic.
Yeah. I mean, that's another way to say it.
You can have you don't have to have a starting point to have. Anyway, I'm not even gonna tie myself to this. This is you.
No, we need to clip this.
Look, that's what Tendo said. I didn't say that. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? No, but I look at it as a very creative pursuit.
It is.
Because like you have to like know, and the barrier to entry I think is what was difficult before.
Yep.
And that's what was tricky, is you had to learn all of these different things and all of these different systems to be able to get a machine to do what you wanted to do.
Right.
And to express your idea in a way that aligns with your actual vision. Now the barrier's lower, so you just have to be able to type a sentence and the computer will respond. And with this agentic tools, that now allows us to do even more. Hey, go and order this thing. Like, we don't have to go in manually do everything. But for me, I didn't get into, like, I didn't study computer science. I liked the idea of, I thought it was really cool, but I was more in the business space and economic space when I was in college, and then I ended up getting into technology because I wanted to start a business. And I was just having a hard time finding a developer that could help me take the vision and bring it to life.
Right.
And so in doing that, and as I was trying to learn jump over all these hurdles and get into the space, I eventually learned, and then I was like, oh, okay, now I know how to use these tools to help me bring something to life.
Right.
And then obviously, like, met a lot of people, met you, and I learned a lot more along the way. But the way that I've always looked at software is as a practice of taking logic and using that logic to help other systems, like machine systems, act in a way that expresses an idea.
Exactly. I mean, that's what software engineering is. But then there's also programming.
Yeah.
Which I think that might be a topic for another discussion, but those are, to me, are two different topics. And I think software engineering is going to get replaced with product engineering, because that bar, what you kind of had to do, which is like learn all these frameworks to be a useful developer, are going to like go away, and now you need to be an expert at explaining with very concise and specific detail what you want your idea to become. And the agent also has to be good enough to translate that. But it kind of raises the bar now to say, like, okay, who is the best at explaining with their logic what they want to see in the world?
Yeah.
And how is that going to manifest?
Yeah. It's like, and that's the thing that people fail to forget, man. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. We change the game as soon as the rules change. Yeah. Because people are like that in general. It's competitive is not the right word, but I think that it's in that space where
it's evolutionary is what it is. It's just taking that next step to survive.
Yeah.
For a lot
like,
of
if
people.
These are the new rules, then like, what does that mean? It's like, how can I separate myself?
Right.
And when we talk about this whole programming thing being obsolete, people start thinking, okay, in a post AI agentic world, how do people compete? How do people like stand out? And we reward that, especially in America. We reward that.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and so yeah, that's very true. So
That's good stuff.
cool.
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of things today.
Yeah.
I think it was a really good just checkpoint in the early parts of 2025 of where AGI is, or where all these
Yeah.
low code, no code platforms are going. So yeah, this was great. This
Love
was
it, man.
fantastic. Yeah, check us out. Like, comment, subscribe.
Till next time, y'all.
Until next time.
Peace.
Peace.
Cool.